Chapter 9. The flies droned against the splecked windows as the two lawmen sat in the marshal's office, smoking quietly, awaiting a report from the three members of Pat's posse combing the town for Percival Plumford, the Englishman. 30 minutes later, Ezra's form bulked in the doorway. "You're barking up the wrong tree," he rumbled, and dropped into a straight-back chair. "The dude was setting in on a stud game at the Cosmopolitan, and he ain't stretched his legs since noon." "What proof you got to back that up?" barked Pat. "Two bartenders and Charlie Tressel of the Lazy Y. Charlie's been watching the game for an hour." "Well, I reckon that's good enough," conceded the sheriff. "'Pears like the gang that grabbed the Mirage got sharp ears and long arms," he observed to Moreland. "I'll bat their ears down in Danville," growled the big marshal. "Promiscuous killings doesn't set very well. Poor old Willie never hurt a fly." Pat realized there was a small chance of corralling the killer with no description and no apparent motive. Plumford seemed to be tied in whenever trouble was a-brewing, but he had an airtight alibi. With him eliminated as a suspect, they were up against a blank wall. In his own mind, the sheriff was convinced that the harmless old desert rat was killed to close his mouth. He rose and stretched. "Well, guess we'll drift. If you get a line on the bushwhacker, send me a word pronto." Sam and Bill jingled up the office as Pat reached the door. "That Limey's a shark at poker." There was a reluctant admiration in Bill's voice. "Right now he's corralled most of all the chips in the Cosmopolitan. Guessed Ezra told you the hairpin's been sitting there for hours?" Pat nodded. "Let's head for the W Bar and brace Todd." The four left Danville and headed for the hills. The Bar W lay 10 miles northwest on the rim of Powder Valley. 15 miles beyond the ranch was Dutch Springs. The terrain grew wilder as they pushed into the scorched hills. Rocks projected from the flanks of ridges like jagged teeth. Thick stands of yellow lodgepole pine closed the benches, and knotty pinyon cluttered the draws. But there were valleys pinching betwixt the high ridges, hawk-high with grass. At one point the trail snaked through a grove of shivering aspen, and they drew rein to water their ponies at a creek rippling white-watered over a boulder-strewn bed fringed by drooping willow. Nature, when she fashioned this corner of the valley, she was in a kindly mood. They walked their hard-breathing ponies up a gulch through a silvery birch, and at its head the W Bar burst into view, set upon a bench, shaded by majestic bull pine. Below the spread, the terrain dropped in a series of benches, dark patched by timber. North and west, vast and overpowering, towered the Cumbrellas. Canyons, gulches, and riven hills massive in undulating battlefields. Beyond them, rising bench upon bench, cliff upon cliff, towards the blue sky, the serrated peaks towered calm and eternal. As they approached, the layout of the spread became clearer. A massive timber and rock ranch house with square rock chimney. Beyond it, among the pines, the bunkhouse, blacksmith shop, and barns. And on the north side, 2 corrals connected by a chute and a fenced pasture. The blades of a windmill turned sluggishly, and the shrill complaint of the squeaky pump jagged upon their ears. "Need some greasing," muttered Bill. "That dog-blasted Todd never fixed nothing." Sam glanced comedically at the frowning features of the former owner of the spread. "Not bad for 4 kings," he crackled. "Especially when he picked him up out of his boot top," growled Bill. Well, you youngsters gotta learn. Me and Ezra now, we stick to the crib. Hello, the house, shouted Pat as they swept around the buildings and drew rein on the slim pine trunk and sat upon two stumps that served as a hitching rail. Bill eyed with growing irritation the litter of saddlery around the two rockers on the porch, empty bottles pitched heedlessly upon the sandy yard, and a cracked window. Yellow hair tousled, Mommy Rakestraw appeared in the open doorway in shirt and overalls. Her dark eyes ran boldly over the posse and focused on the sheriff's glinting star.
"Is this a social call, or are you dead set on hanging someone?"
she demanded throatily. "We're just stopping by," drawled Pat. "Todd around?"
"He's sleeping off a jag."
The girl tossed her head backwards, her hair streaming like a pony's mane. The sheriff swung to the ground. "Well, I crave a word with them. Send them out." His even voice had a brittle edge. A flash of temper sparkled in Mommy's eyes. She paused and then swung quickly around and disappeared inside. "Rest your legs." Pat flung back over his shoulder. He mounted the porch steps and pushed aside a tangle of saddlery with his foot and settled down into a rocker. Tall and heavy-boned, with a round, monkish face and a tight mouth, a gray-shirted cowman lumbered out of the house. A gun belt circling the waist of his dark pants, and his unbuttoned shirt flapped open, exposing a hairless but powerful chest. His dank hair was disheveled, and his small, glimly eyes rimmed red. He stood in the doorway and stared around sluggishly. Bill glared at him with slinted eyes, decided he was either half asleep or half drunk.
"Well?"
Todd Rakestraw's voice was deep and sonorous with a veneer of geniality.
"The sheriff and his partners. Ain't that nice?"
"Sit down before you fall down," invited Pat shortly. Rakestraw stepped uncertainly towards the remaining rocking chair, stumbling over a saddle, and flopped into the chair. "Ike Big Nose was asking after you," said the sheriff casually. "Seems he kind of missed your company over there on the Needle Rock." Sudden alertness showed in Rakestraw's eyes. His frame tightened, but his features remained as smooth as a mask.
"Ike Big Nose?" he inquired.
"Yeah, Ike was leaving on a long trip."
"You don't say."
"To hell." Rakestraw was wide awake now. His eyes searched Pat's lean features. I don't get it," he said slowly. "I plugged the bastard," snapped Pat. "Reckon you'd be missing him."
"Why," declared the cowman, "I ain't seen Ike in a month."
He stared blandly at Bill's glooming figure.
"Him and me, we split when I took over the W bar."
"You ain't seen him since?"
"Not a slander."
Mommy's yellow head projected through the doorway.
"How come I saw his crow bait in the corral last week?"
Todd Rakestraw met her mocking eyes unblinkingly, venom in his blank stare, and then turned to the sheriff.
"That hellcat's on the prod. Her squawking don't mean nothing. Ike must have rode in when I was in town. Ain't always been around the spread. How come you plugged him? Horse stealing?"
You might call it that."
"Well, ain't that too bad? Needle Rock, you say? Well, that's considerably out of my range."
"You wouldn't have no interest in the Mirage Mine?" Rakestraw showed a line of white teeth and an unusual grin.
"Oh, quit funning, Sheriff. I'm a cowman." You wouldn't give me a bum steer now, would you? The sheriff's voice was softly accusing. The other raised his long arms in protest. Now why should I? I heard about the Mirage Mine, yeah. They've been talking Mirage Mine ever since I drifted into these parts. Pete Ford, he claimed he located it, but you know those old desert rats. They always be getting bees in their bonnets.
Ask him why he took a pot shot at me in Danville, blurted Bill.
Maybe he had heard about that.
The squat rider's fingers were itching at his gun butt. Quit, snapped the sheriff. This don't call for gunplay. He again gave his attention to the smooth-faced Rakestraw. So, you split with Ike?
You said her, Sheriff.
Rakestraw smiled slowly.
Ike went kind of wild. Me, I'm for law and order.
Like hell you are, growled Bill. Pat raised out of the rocker. Well, that's that. He glanced down at the cowman's complacent features. You're quite the poker player? Rakestraw's thin lips drew back in a grin.
Ask Bill.
Well, play him close to your vest.
Mister, I don't play him no other way, returned the other smoothly.
Mommy slipped out of the house as the riders tightened their clinches and stepped close to Bill.
You should call Todd a liar. Her voice was low and charged with passion.
The squat rider straightened and met her burning eyes.
Well, what come over you, Mommy?
The sheriff and his partners pulled away. Rakestraw still sprawled in the rocker, limbs loose but his eyes alert. His gun was thrust well forward to expedite a draw.
That's hogwash about that Eastern girl.
She mimicked Bill's deep voice.
Looked like a broody hen wearing blinders, homely like a cow barn. I saw that dull-faced hussy in town. Mighty sweet dish to be taken out on the barons.
Well, see here, Mammy, sputtered Bill, his neck a-reddening. You got no call to shoot off that way. Miss Ford's no hussy, and she's changed a-plenty.
Yeah, since when?
Bill lifted his wide shoulders and set a foot in the stirrup. Quit your hally-hootin', he growled. Mommy stepped closer, and her full red lips parted. Her voice changed to a purr.
Say, Bill, there's a dance out at Wheeler's schoolhouse come Saturday.
Her hand fastened on his brawny forearm. Her dark eyes were soft.
I've got plenty of bids, but I thought maybe you.
She paused expectantly. The rider fidgeted with embarrassment. In the press of events, he had clearly forgotten the Wheeler dance. Time was when he would have given his right arm to escort the vivid Mommy to the shindig. Well, now he wasn't so sure. Still, she said she had turned down other fellers, and that meant she'd be stuck if he backed out. Sure, Mommy, he grunted. Glad to take you along. Well, I gotta get going. He swung around the buckskin and dug in the rowels. The animal leapt forward at a fast canter. He followed the three riders, dropping down the bench.
The bait don't look so good to the poor fish as it used to, eh?
A voice mocked her from the porch. Mommy swung around stormily.
You keep your nose out of my affairs, Todd.
Little sister's scared of losing her beau, he taunted.
Not to that high-steppin' doll he's been gallivanting around with.
The posse hit Dutch Springs as the shadows were lengthening. Bill watered his pony at the livery barn, rubbed it down with a rolled gunny sack, and spilled out a measure of grain. And then he headed for the Gold Eagle. Phyllis Ford stepped out of the Jewel Hotel as he jingled down the plank walk. Cool and graceful in a blue and white calico dress, features ovaled beneath a planted white straw hat, she drew a low whistle from the approaching rider. He grinned cheerfully as they met. "You sure look pretty as a painted wagon, ma'am." Her blue eyes questioned.
"Is that a compliment akin to the broody hen in the cow barn?"
she asked. "Oh, shucks, no, ma'am. That means you're as handsome as a ace full of kings."
"I imagine that would be a welcome sight," she returned meaningfully, "when you men start branding ranches around."
Affixed to the dusty window of the saddlery before which they stood was a poster, and it caught her eye. Aloud she read,
"Big dance at Wheeler Schoolhouse. 3-piece orchestra and plenty of food. Come one and come all. That sounds exciting. Do you dance, Bill?"
Bill nodded, a cold premonition chilling his backbone.
"So do I," she enthused. "I've never attended a cowboy dance. It would be quite the experience."
The rider shook his head solemnly. "Well, they ain't such a muck, kind of rough and a bit for a city-bred gal, and the music's just fiddles."
"Why, I'd love it,"
she insisted. Bill's spurs tingled as his feet shifted uneasily. Phyllis's blue eyes focused upon him appealingly.
"I hate to be brazen, but if you're free."
"Sorry, ma'am," he interjected abruptly, "but I got a date." The girl's eyes chilled.
"I'm sorry to have troubled you. Mr. O'Leary at the bank offered to take me, but I thought—"
She bit her lip.
"Well, I have some shopping to do."
Frigidly, she stepped past him. Bill moved on, feet lagging. He knew Tim O'Leary, the silver-tongued young cashier at the Cattleman's Bank, only too well. Tim would never pass up a choice morsel like Phyllis Ford, the best-looking gal in the valley. Why in hell blazes did Mommy Rakestraw have to get him all tangled up? When Phyllis saw him at the dance with another girl, she'd be off him for life. As he dragged along moodily, an idea struck him with the impact of a bullet. He wheeled and hastened back after the girl. Panting, he caught up with her at the steps of the general merchandise store. Phyllis's eyes flushed his face coolly. "Say, ma'am," he blurted, "maybe you'd fancy a saddle horse to ride around a mite. That bay mare you was straddling sits in the crowd behind the livery barn. It sure needs exercise. Any time you want to use it, you can go right ahead."
"That's very nice of you," she smiled. "But Mr. O'Leary has a lovely little pony with white legs. He calls it Stockings. I ride it often. He's been showing me the country, evenings. He rides your bay. The livery says it's been eating its head off."
"The big Irish four-flusher!" exploded Bill. "What right does he have to be running the legs off my bay?"
"Well, it ain't nothing to be ill-tempered about," Phyllis reminded him sweetly. "We rest quite often."
"I'm going to be seeing that dang horse thief," glowered Bill. Meanwhile, in the sheriff's lean-to, Pat and his two cronies discussed the mystery of the Mirage Mine. "'Pears there's a gang in on this," pronounced Pat somberly. "They killed Pete and located the mine and aimed to discourage visitors, which accounts for Ike's setting at Needle Rock. Willie, he knew too much, so they closed his mouth for keeps, and Todd Rakestraw seems to be holding a hand." "I swore he wasn't," broke in Sam. Pat rose and fumbled in the pocket of his sleeveless jacket that was hanging on the well peg and produced a yellow-veined chunk of ore. "Look at that." He picked it and held it up. "I picked that up on Todd's front porch, and that smooth-faced hairpin swears he was a cowman, nothing else but." "Why in the hell didn't you tax the coyote about it?" demanded Sam. Where's the proof? Todd could swear some hairpin dropped at maybe Ike. We couldn't prove different. But Todd didn't kill Willie, so that gives us another Jasper in Danville, and God knows how many more out there on the Mirage. We sure are up against quite a lot. End of chapter 9.